Hi guys, I'm just another guy named James, and today I'm going to be talking about the Nightwing and Huntress limited series from where's the year? 1998. And yeah, so this series obviously was released in 1998, specifically in the summer of 1998. What is interesting about the series releasing that year is Nightwing had his own monthly comic at the time. I don't believe Huntress did. But yeah, so this kind of comes out in the middle of what is considered to be kind of an iconic run on the Nightwing comic. In the mainline Nightwing comic at the time, it's being written by Chuck Dixon and being drawn by Scott McDaniel. I don't like Scott McDaniel's artwork at all. He's not very controversial of an artist, but I just don't like him. I don't like his artwork. But on the flip side, over here in this limited series that we're actually talking about today, this series was written by Devin Grayson and then drawn by Greg Land. Now, Greg Land is a massively controversial artist. Not because of his stuff that he did while he was at DC, his Nightwing, his Birds of Prey, not as much anyway. But after he left DC and he started working at Marvel, he started to really copying artwork, using beyond what is considered to be the normal degrees of inspiration. He was just using references too much in ways that were not considered okay. And some of the references he was using were especially not okay. During his time at Marvel, he was tracing some pornographic images to put into his comics, which is extremely not okay, obviously. So he is not a very well-respected or well-regarded artist. But taking away what he did later in his career, at this stage in his career, his artwork is pretty decent. It's not great, but it's better than his artwork became later, and it's not bad. It's not offensive in any way. And from what I could tell, looking into Greg Land's background on the internet, it seems like he didn't really start copying art either until he started working for Marvel, or until later in his time at DC. So this is some actual Greg Land art, as far as I can tell. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. But yeah, Greg Land, controversial artist, probably not a great dude. But yeah. He's the one who drew it. Devin Grayson is the author. Devin Grayson, if you know that name, you probably know her from when she wrote the mainline Nightwing series later in the early 2000s, or from when she wrote Titans for DC. Otherwise, again, looking at her bibliography online, I can't really think of anything you would know her from. But yeah, that's her creative team. Not quite A-listers of the time, but they do spin together a pretty good story. It's a classic detective. It's a detective story. It's hard. I do think throughout the story takes place in Gotham. I don't think I mentioned that anywhere in my script explicitly, but the story takes place in Gotham, and yeah, it's just it's a pretty long detective story, and that's okay because it's also a pretty good detective story. And yeah, overall, it's just a pretty well put together piece of comic book literature. Let's see. Is there anything else worth... Huntress. So, Huntress as a character has two versions. She has the pre-Crisis Earth 2 version of her character, which is one of the more popular versions, and that's where she's Helena Wayne, and meaning that she's Bruce Wayne's daughter. Yeah, that's not the version in this story. The version of Huntress in this story is what's her name? Helena Bertinelli, something like that. Yeah, Helena Bertinelli, and she is the daughter of a mob boss, and her family was killed by the mafia. So she is like very, and she's also considered to be a much more violent and aggressive superhero. She's one of the ones who has no issues killing people, and because of that, she's kind of ostracized by the rest of the heroes of Gotham. So like Batman doesn't like her, neither does Robin, neither does Oracle. Like no, she's kind of the black sheep of the Gotham superheroes. But yeah, let's see. Yeah, and it is worth noting that while this story takes place in Gotham, Gotham is not where Nightwing normally hangs out at this point in comics history. At this point in comics history, he's moved on. He's his own character, has his own city, but he's watching Gotham while Batman's off on a different, unnamed, unspecified adventure. But yeah, I think that's probably way more background than we need. So. Yeah, so I think we're ready to just straight up hop into our story, which opens on a woman being murdered by an unknown assailant in a hotel room, before the murderer starts freaking out, trying to get his fingerprints off of everything. We then cut away to a thug named Frankie Black, who is overseeing a gun run before his girlfriend finds him to smooch up on him, but one of Frankie's men comes up to him and tells him that a hooker was murdered in the hotel room that Frankie rented as a cover-up for the gun run he is currently on. So Frankie runs away to figure out his next steps. We then see Nightwing, who is observing the heist and listening in on the conversation. So he knows that Frankie didn't kill the hooker. We then go back to the hotel where we see Police Sergeant Bullock has arrived on the scene, and he's questioning Officer Mason, the first cop on the scene and the one who called it in, about why, and he's trying to figure out, and Bullock's trying to figure out why Mason went into the hotel. And Mason explains that he was going after Frankie. We then pan up and we see that Huntress is observing the scene. And back with Nightwing, we see that he's seen enough, so he jumps in and starts fighting, busting heads. And soon it turns into an all-out gunfight until Nightwing takes down all the criminals. But he's mostly looking for information on their boss's boss, the head of their mafia, a man named Malfetti. We then cut back to Huntress, who is observing Frankie turn himself into the police, when Nightwing shows up on her rooftop. Nightwing is there to tell Huntress, who has a personal vendetta against the mafia, specifically Frankie Black, that Frankie Black is not guilty of the murder. But Huntress doesn't care. She seems to be willing to let him go down for the murder, even though he didn't do it. We then cut into the police station and into an interrogation room, where we see Officer Mason is beating Frankie up, trying to get him to confess to the murder. But Sergeant Bullock pulls Mason away. We then cut to Malfetti, and the head of the crime family Frankie works for, and we learn that Frankie is trying to double-cross Malfetti, trying to split ties with him. We then cut back to Nightwing and Huntress, who are investigating the crime scene at the hotel. And Nightwing notices how clean the hotel is, which isn't normally the case in a mafia hit. We then see the Huntress basically out of nowhere going for a kiss on Nightwing. We then jump back into the police station where we see a Gotham City Police Department vice cop is looking for his missing partner, who looks an awful lot like the victim from the beginning of the story. We then cut down to autopsy, where the vice cop identifies the murdered woman as his partner, and tells Sergeant Bullock that his partner was not authorized for the sting operation she was trying to perform against Frankie. But she did it anyway because she was obsessed with taking Frankie down. We then cut back to Nightwing and Huntress, who are swinging through Gotham as Nightwing explains that he wants to find Frankie's right-hand man, Pascal, so he can give them information about the murder in the hotel. We then cut to the apartment of Frankie's girlfriend, Mariah, and we see Malfetti show up and introduce himself, seemingly so he can use Mariah's leverage against Frankie. Back with Nightwing, we see him subtly confront Pascal before Huntress comes busting in through a skylight, starts whooping up on him, and Pascal reveals that Frankie was using the hotel as a cover from Malfetti, so Frankie could sell the guns to another thug without having to cough up any money to Malfetti. Nightwing then pulls Huntress off of Pascal, sending her away so he can question Pascal by himself. After a brief intermission where we see Frankie in interrogation, we cut back to Nightwing, who is confronting Huntress in an alley outside of the building, and he splits from her because Huntress is using way too extreme of methods, but Huntress is continuing to defend those methods. We then cut back to the police station where we see Malfetti visiting Frankie, trying to get him to explain why Frankie was running weapons on his own, and Malfetti's using Mariah as leverage to get Frankie to be honest. We then see Nightwing fill Huntress in on what he's learned, which is basically that Frankie was using the gun run as a way to get out of the mob, letting a rival not take a cut to Malfetti, and offering his resignation for the mistake. But that still leaves the question of who killed the woman in the hotel. Back at the police station, we see Officer Mason learn that the woman killed in the hotel was a cop before he runs into the evidence room, where he runs into Huntress, who asks him what he's doing there. To which Mason responds that he's making sure Frankie Black goes down for the murder, so Frankie doesn't kill him for calling in the case. And Huntress decides to believe him. Up at the visitor center, we see Malfetti break out Frankie, shooting up the place as he does. Back with Nightwing, we see him and Huntress reunite before Nightwing wants to go back to the station to check on Frankie, not knowing that Frankie's already been broken out / kidnapped. We then cut to Malfetti, who has taken Frankie and his girlfriend to a property he owns way out in the middle of nowhere in Gotham. He's making some not so subtly veiled threats to Frankie against Mariah, and we then cut back to Nightwing, who is jumping down into the street to talk to a group of prostitutes about Frankie Black. One of the prostitutes tells Nightwing that she was the one originally going to the hotel, but the cop paid her to let her go in instead. And the prostitute then tells Nightwing that the dead cop went into the hotel with another cop in uniform, and that the two were arguing as they walked into the hotel. We then cut to Huntress, who is shaking down Pascal, telling him that he'll go down for murder instead of Frankie unless Pascal fingers Frankie, but no matter what, Pascal is turning himself in, and Malfetti makes Pascal do it. Back with Nightwing, we see Oracle is informing him that Malfetti has broken Frankie out of jail. And Nightwing then has Oracle begin getting him a list of every uniformed officer who answered the call to the hotel, and he wants to know who called it in, because the evidence is pointing towards another cop being the murderer. Nightwing then decides that he wants to have a chat with Pascal to find out what he knows, since he was the one at the hotel. But when he goes to find him, he instead runs into a group of cops who are looking for Frankie. And the cops let Nightwing know that Pascal has turned himself in. So Nightwing lets them know that it couldn't have been him, and that there is evidence to suggest that it was another cop. And he says all this right before he disappears into the night. We then jump up to a rooftop where Nightwing and Huntress meet up. Nightwing tries to convince Huntress that they need to save Frankie from Malfetti, but she isn't convinced, because of how much she wants Frankie dead. We then cut into the GCPD interrogation room, where we see Sergeant Bullock and Lieutenant Ellison, the vice cop from earlier, are interviewing Pascal, but Ellison is losing interest in what Pascal is saying. So he takes a little walk so he can think about what Nightwing told him about the evidence that it was a cop who committed the murder. We then see Ellison have a brief conversation with Officer Mason, where Ellison asks for Mason's theory on the murder. And Mason seems a little shaky as he explains that he believes that Frankie Black murdered the woman. And he reminds Ellison that there's still more evidence that could pop up, like a pillowcase that was seen missing from the bed in the hotel room. We then see Ellison use the bat signal to call Nightwing, and the two have an unseen conversation before Ellison comes running through the police station to the interrogation room, picking up Officer Mason along the way, explaining that he's found new evidence. Ellison says that he found the pillowcase. Pascal says it wasn't with him or with Frankie, to which Ellison agrees, saying Pascal is free to go, much to the chagrin of Sergeant Bullock. And Ellison starts pointing his finger at Officer Mason, who cracks, saying that Ellison had no right to go through his locker, basically just admitting to his own guilt. But Bullock and Ellison are too busy arguing to notice Pascal walk out, with Mason following not far behind. We then see Nightwing and Huntress have learned the location of Malfetti's hideout and are heading that way. We then go back into the police station, where we see Pascal hop in a cab to go to the hideout, and Mason follows Pascal in a cop car. In the cop car, we see Officer Mason starting to freak out, admitting to killing the female police officer at the beginning of the story, and then pulling his gun on the officer driving the car. We then see Nightwing and Huntress are driving out of Gotham to Malfetti's location in Huntress's sports car. At the police department, we see Bullock and Ellison trying to explain the situation to Commissioner Gordon, who sends the pair to go after Officer Mason. Back with Mason, we see that he has arrived near Malfetti's, and that he has killed the officer who was driving him. Then Nightwing and Huntress also arrive on the scene. Inside the house, we see Frankie holding his girlfriend close, explaining that Malfetti's going to kill her to hurt him. So as Frankie holds her close, he shoots her, so he can't be controlled by Malfetti anymore. Frankie then walks outside, where he's confronted by Officer Mason, who is trying to arrest Frankie, but when Mason pulls his gun on Frankie, Pascal comes out pulling his gun on Mason. We then see Nightwing and Huntress, who are observing the situation. Nightwing then comes up with the plan to divide and conquer, having Huntress defend Frankie so that they can use his testimony to take down Malfetti, and having himself stop Malfetti from slipping out of the back of the building. We then see Nightwing jump down and take down a couple of guards before confronting Malfetti. We then see Huntress jump in and take down Pascal and Mason just in time for the real cops to show up and arrest Mason. Mason, Pascal, Frankie, and Malfetti all get arrested. We then see a brief epilogue where Nightwing visits Huntress in her secret identity, basically ending the story on a very brief moment of friendship between the two characters. And yeah, that's the story. Overall, it's a pretty decent detective story. It would make a pretty clean single episode TV show. You know what I mean? It's nothing crazy. It's nothing that exciting, but it is a lot of good character work for Nightwing. Having him like building that trust with other characters in the DC universe, especially characters who are not generally trusted by the other superheroes around. It's pretty solid. Like, panel to panel, the artwork's pretty decent. The storytelling's pretty clear. It is a well-written mystery in the sense that you can figure it out on your own. It's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to figure out on your own. From my summer, it probably sounded a lot easier than it is reading the issues. And reading the issues, it's not hard, let's be clear. But it is a well enough put together mystery that you can figure it out, but not everyone is going to. Which is always a good thing. I do like that you get to see the world of Gotham in this story. You know, you have Sergeant Bullock, you have Huntress, you have Commissioner Gordon right at the very end, you have Oracle about halfway through the story. it's a pretty good series. One thing that I don't necessarily like about it is that I didn't touch on this in my recap, in my summary. Nightwing and Huntress do have a very physical relationship in this story, which I don't necessarily like. It doesn't really fit with the story. It doesn't really add anything to the story. It's kind of just a moment in there for... I honestly, God, even couldn't tell you the reason. Like, it's just an odd moment in the story. Like, it doesn't really take away anything, but it definitely doesn't add anything. So I just don't know why it's there. But overall, it's fine. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't take away anything, but it's definitely not adding anything either. And it's hard. I definitely, this is, so that's like the fourth person that I've seen Nightwing like be in a romantic relationship with. She's definitely the worst one. But yeah, they're also kind of clearly setting up like Nightwing and Oracle being an item in the story. But yeah, overall it is just kind of a fun one shot, like one story Nightwing adventure. And for that it's pretty good. Yeah, it is nice getting to seeing Dick Grayson kind of being the like kind of hopeful character that he is, but still playing his cards close to his chest. Like throughout the story, he never lets Huntress know his secret identity. One of the big reasons behind that is that if she knows his secret identity, she'll be able to figure out Batman's secret identity because of how closely the two are linked. But in general, Nightwing just plays his cards pretty close to his chest throughout the story, which does make sense. But yeah, overall I just think it's a pretty good story. I'd recommend giving it a read if you're a Nightwing fan. But yeah, it's pretty fun. The artwork's decent. You can always, if nothing else, tell what's going on, which is a big improvement from the last Nightwing limited series. Because that first limited series, man, that had some rough artwork, which it's hard. I believe it was actually penciled by the same guy, but the inks make it so much clearer what's going on. And then I believe both Nightwing series were penciled by Greg Land. But this second one is just a lot clearer. It doesn't have that early 90s, like mid 90s, like all that hatching and cross hatching and like massively disproportionate figures. It's just better drawn, like more. It's like modern traditional art, which I kind of like. It's like very clearly, it's modern art. Look at that coloring, especially very modern coloring tactics, but like it doesn't have that like 90s like terrible anatomy thing, like complete lack of anatomically correct drawing, which is nice. At least to me, I like it. But yeah, that's really all I gotta say on this one. It's just a pretty good Nightwing detective story. Yeah, that's really all I got for you today. So I'm just another guy named James, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.